Welcome back to Worship in the Trenches. I'm Josh Sahulik, and today I want to start by asking you to picture something with me. Imagine you're standing in your living room, but it doesn't look like a living room anymore. The drywall's ripped out, you can see the studs, there's dust on everything, and I mean everything. Tools are scattered across the surface, you have drop cloths covering your furniture, and you're standing there thinking, this looks worse than when we started. If you've ever been in the middle of a home renovation, you know this feeling. Some days you walk through and feel genuinely discouraged by the mess. The vision you had, those beautiful paint samples, those drawings of what it's supposed to look like, they feel very far away when you're staring at exposed studs and you're breathing drywall dust. But here's what keeps you going. You have the plans. You know this torn out wall isn't the end of the story. It's the necessary middle. The ruins are real, but they're temporary. And here's what I want to explore with you today. This is actually closer to biblical worship than we might think, because the passages that we're going to walk through together show us that God's people worship in the ruins while keeping their eyes fixed on what lies ahead. Not pretending that the ruins aren't real, not waiting until everything is finished, but standing in the mess, but with the plans in their hand. And this is where most of us as Christians generally live, and it's precisely where Scripture meets us. Today we're exploring what I'm calling worship in the yet. The little word yet shows up again and again in Scripture, at exactly the moments when God's people are standing in the middle of something that's not finished. When the ruins are real, but the resurrection is certain, when we're living in that space between Job's suffering and Jesus' victory. So let me walk you through the Scripture as it teaches us about worshiping in this in-between or liminal space, because I think it's going to change how you approach Sunday morning, and maybe even how you face Monday morning. So let's start with Psalm 17. The psalm doesn't hide anything. Enemies are circling, death is threatening, and the worshiper cries out, "Keep me as the apple of the eye. Hide me under the shadow of thy wings." This is a prayer from someone who knows that they're vulnerable, who can name what's wrong without any spiritual varnish. And here's what matters. This person brings the ruins into worship rather than leaving them at the door. The lament itself is worship. So think about that for a minute. God isn't requiring us to arrive at church having already solved our problems or manufactured joy. In fact, Psalm 17 is teaching us that honest crying out to God is itself an act of faith, because you only cry out to someone you believe is listening and is able to help. For those of us in the trenches, whether we're planning worship or participating in it, this is crucial. We don't have to pretend that everything is fine to worship God. In fact, pretending might be the very thing that keeps us from true, genuine worship. Next, now let's go to Job 19, because this is where we see what worship in the ruins looks like when it's grounded in hope. Job is speaking as a man who's lost everything. His children are dead, his body is literally rotting, and his wife has told him to curse God and die. His friends insist that his suffering must be punishment for sin, and these are not metaphorical ruins, this is true devastation. And from this exact place, from the ashes, from the physical and emotional wreckage of his life, Job makes this declaration: I know that my Redeemer liveth. Not I hope, not perhaps, he knows. Then comes the word that changes everything. Yet, in my flesh shall I see God. So did you catch that word, yet? The yet doesn't erase the worms that are destroying his body. It doesn't minimize the loss. The yet looks straight at death and claims something that death cannot touch. This is a foundation we're building on today. Job shows us that resurrection hope isn't about denying present suffering, but about seeing past it to what God has promised. The Redeemer will stand on earth, and Job will see him with his own eyes. Death is real, but the Redeemer is more real. This is worship in the ruins, speaking faith when circumstances scream otherwise. And as we continue through the biblical narrative, we look at Haggai chapter 2, because this passage shows us something also important about how God works in unimpressive circumstances. You see, in Job's case, it was personal ruin, but here the people have returned from exile to rebuild the temple. But here's the problem. Anyone who knew or saw Solomon's temple know this one is a pathetic comparison. God himself acknowledges it through the prophet. Is it not in your eyes, in comparison of it as nothing? God doesn't dispute their assessment. The ruins of their worship space are obvious. The disappointment is real. But then God speaks, "Yet, now be strong, for I am with you." There's this word again, yet. The glory of this latter house shall be greater than of the former, not through human effort, not through impressive architecture, but because the desire of all nations shall come. So here's what this teaches those of us in the front lines of worship and in ministry. God doesn't wait for perfect conditions to be present with his people. The pathetic temple becomes the place where greater glory will appear. How many of us are serving in small churches, leading struggling ministries, working with limited resources? And how many of us look at what we're doing and think, this is nothing compared to what I've seen elsewhere? Haggai says, worship and work in these unimpressive circumstances anyway, because God is building towards something you can't see. Your small beginnings don't disqualify you from God's presence or his promises. And now we get to Jesus. We need to understand why this hope is real, and for that, we go to Luke chapter 20. The Sadducees think they've trapped Jesus with a clever question. If resurrection is real, then whose wife will this woman be who married 7 different brothers, each one passing away and marrying them consecutively? And Jesus doesn't get tangled in their scenario. Instead, he cuts to the foundation. He points them back to Moses at the burning bush, where God calls himself the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Then Jesus says something that makes sense of everything we've been talking about. For he is not a God of the dead, but of the living, for all live unto him. Now let that land for a second. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob have been dead for centuries. Their bodies are long gone. But from God's perspective, they are alive. Not will be alive someday. They live unto him right now. And this is the answer to Job's hope. This is why Haggai's people can work in their disappointing temple. This is why we can worship in the ruins. When we worship in the yet, we're not hoping for something completely in the future. We're aligning our vision with God's vision, and we're learning to see what he sees. The patriarchs live. Job's Redeemer stands. The greater glory is always present in God's eternal view, breaking into time. Worship in the yet means living toward what God knows is already true. And let's bring this to Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, because this shows us what worship looks like while you're still waiting. The church in Thessalonica is confused about timing. When will Jesus return? The ruins around them include false teaching, persecution, general anxiety. Paul tells them not to be shaken, then describes troubles still to come before Christ's return. But notice what he does next. And this is crucial for those of us in ministry. Right in the middle of warning them about coming deception and tribulation, Paul pivots to thanksgiving. But we are bound to give thanks always to God for you, brethren beloved of the Lord. Then he gives them marching orders. Stand fast and hold the traditions which ye have been taught. This is the church living in the yet. Ruins behind them, ruins ahead of them, and the call to worship and stand firm right now. You give thanks. You stand fast. You remember that God has chosen you and called you to obtain the glory of Jesus Christ. The resurrection isn't just past. Jesus rose. It's not just future. We will also rise with him. It's the reality that shapes how we live today while we are waiting. The ruins don't disappear. The waiting doesn't end, but we worship in the yet because all live unto him, and that includes us. So finally, Psalm 145 becomes a song of those who've learned to sing in the yet. The psalmist says, I will extol thee, my God, O King, and I will bless thy name forever and ever. Every day will I bless thee. You see, this isn't naive optimism. This is the voice of someone who has walked the path with Psalm 17's honest crying out. Through Job's ashes, through Haggai's disappointing temple, through Jesus' revelation about the living God and Paul's in-between existence. The psalmist can say, the Lord preserves all them that love him. Because preservation doesn't mean avoiding death. It means living unto God through death. One generation shall praise thy works to another, because resurrection makes even death a transition rather than an ending. This psalm isn't the song you sing after you escape the ruins. It's the song you sing while still in them, because you've learned to see with God's eyes. So let me bring this to where we live, to the trenches where Sunday's worship meets Monday morning. Jesus perfectly models this pattern. He wept at Lazarus' tomb. The ruin was real. Then he called Lazarus out, demonstrating that God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And on the cross, Jesus entered the ultimate ruin, death itself. And he did it with the words of worship on his lips, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. Following Jesus means we worship in the ruins without pretending they're not ruins. We name our losses, we admit what's broken, we don't spiritualize away pain. But we also don't let the ruins define what is truly real. Think about how this changes Sunday morning. for those of us planning worship or leading it. We're not creating a service that requires people to arrive having already solved their problems. We're creating space for Psalm 17's honesty, for people to bring their actual lives, their genuine struggles, and their true fears. And we're teaching them to move from that honest lament towards Psalms 145's praise. Not because we fixed everything, but because we're learning to see what God sees. This is worship in the yet. The ruins remain visible, the resurrection remains certain, and we stand in between. So let me leave you with this question this week. How would your life change if you really believed that all live unto Him? That from God's perspective, the resurrection life is already breaking into your present reality. So whether you're planning Sunday service, leading a ministry that feels too small, or sitting in the pew with a heart full of questions, the call is the same. Worship in the yet. Say with Job, "Yet in my flesh shall I see God." Say with Jesus, "All live unto Him." Stand in the ruins, hold the plans, keep the vision, and worship the God who is already at work in the mess. May you find yourself singing praise not after the ruins are cleared, but right in the middle of them. Thanks for joining me this week in the trenches. It's my privilege to stand shoulder to shoulder with you.